Hello, everybody. My name is Johanna Leifeld. Marie talked a little already about me. I'm a project manager in the project of the German Forum for Higher Education in the Digital Age, which is a very fancy word or name in English. And in German, we are simply called Hochschulforum Digitalisierung, or the abbreviation HFD, AHD. And we understand ourselves as a central initiator. We inform, we advise, and we network a lot. So we network with members of universities, with policymakers. We network a lot with students, digital learning experts, and society at large. And we thereby aim to drive innovation within higher education. And my personal focus lies on faculty counseling regarding their digitization strategies. And I'm happy to see so many interested faces here today. So welcome, everybody, and thanks for having me. Today, I want to talk to you about my vision of the future of higher education. But before I do that, I would like to first talk about some myths regarding higher education and the digitization of it. And I would like to talk about the current status in the higher education in Germany. So let's start with some myths regarding digitization. There you see them. There are many topics that have been spoken about in the last couple of years that have been spoken about in media, but also when it comes to people who are actively involved in higher education. And I believe a lot of them have to do with fear. And today I will present some of those myths and demystify some of them. So in this way, we can create like a space for an open negotiation process. Because I believe digital higher education should not be only described as good or bad, and rather I want to invite you to an open discussion on what the future of higher education would look like, because this is why we're all here today. So let's start with the first two myths. The first two myths are that a large part of universities will vanish and classroom teaching is to be abolished. And I believe, especially after the experiences during the pandemic, many people in the context of higher education fear that the digital transformation will abolish universities as places of itself and establish online-only teaching as the new normal. And this myth dates actually back to the year of 2013, 2014. And I brought you two newspaper articles. They're unfortunately in German, but I'm going to translate them. They are from March and December of 2014, and they say German universities missed the trend of the century, and German unis cannot go back into analog times. So the myth of the death of university and the resulting loss of the significance of the place itself dates back to emergence of the so-called massive open online courses. Back then in 2013, 2014, we had the same discussion that, especially in the media, it was being presented as something like, if we can put teaching into the digital sphere, like why do we need universities? What do we need them for? But I think the massive open online courses are a good example because you can see not so much has changed, at least not in Germany. There was this threat or a perceived threat by the massive open online courses, but there was no fundamental or area-wide change in the system of higher education. And fast forwarding to 2020, in the media, again, there's a similar discussion, because as a consequence of the past digital semesters and proclamation that universities have handled the pandemic quite well, the same question emerges again, the question about the significance of the place of higher education. And so the media again puts headlines like how universities abolish themselves. But I think it's important to take a closer look. And when you look at what university administrators say, especially since the Corona semesters, you can find a number of statements of opinion that are clearly in favor of prioritizing face-to-face teaching. most universities want to stay presence universities, and most universities and surveys also shows that teachers and also students, they confirm this picture. There's hardly any desire for pure online teaching. And in a survey conducted during the 2020-2021 semester, only 2% of teachers actually advocated pure online teaching in the future, whereas 80% were in favor of a wide variety of mixed methods. And the president of the Lübeck University of Technology, Muriel Helbig, she once said, universities can embrace digitization. No one wants to abolish classroom teaching. No one wants to go back to pre-corona operation. What then? And I think we're exactly in this point, because the most pressing question right now in post or almost post or maybe post pandemic higher education, it doesn't revolve around the competition of pure online and pure face-to-face teaching, but it is about a long-term valuable connection of the both. And before we go on, I would like you to take 5 minutes of your time and look to the right, look to the left, see wherever is around you, find a friendly face, and discuss a little. Because I believe an important question that we should ask ourselves is, what is so special about being uni and about uni as a place? And maybe what's the value for my students coming into uni? So I prepared these 3 questions for you, and I would like you to now just discuss a little bit with your neighbor what it actually means to study and what maybe the brand sense of a university degree is, and what the campus have to do with all of this. And if you're here digitally, don't you worry. Someone is gonna put you in a 5-minute breakout room with a friendly stranger, hopefully, so you can discuss these questions as well. I looked a little bit about the about being at uni, about like the process of being at uni, and I found a quote from our president, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, from a speech that he gave to students at the beginning of a semester. And he explains the purpose of the campus or being at uni actually is, I suspect, however, that the most important realization for most of you after a year of digital studying is this: how indispensable the university is as a place of encounter. And when we go back to the myth that universities as places will be abolished and online teaching is going to be the new normal, I don't believe it's going to happen, because universities are much more than pure lectures and or online courses. I do believe university is a lot about meeting each other and experiencing who is involved in higher education across status groups, and to be able to enter into a direct exchange. And I believe these are some of the most important functions of the place of higher education itself. And it's not just about becoming a professional, it's also about personal development, what I do while I meet other people. And I also believe that the reproduction of this in a digital-only learning experience environment is not so easy. So rather than worrying about universities vanishing, I think we should use this moment to reflect on ourselves and our universities, our teaching, our learning environments, and to answer the question of whether they meet the requirements of being a place for learning together and meeting each other. And if I can answer these questions with a yes, I believe there's no need to worry that universities will vanish. And if I'm not sure if I can answer these questions with a yes, I think now is the opportunity to use contemporary concepts and the lessons learned from the past semesters to actually redesign my own teaching or the place of university itself in a new and future-oriented way. And what I understand under future-oriented, we're going to come to later. But first we go to the second myth. That digitization makes teachers redundant. And this is also talked about for a long time. It's even older than the myth that universities will vanish. And it actually dates back to the 1960s when the Americans were really worried about their state of educational system. Because shortly before, the Sputnik shock has happened, and they realized the Soviet Union was able to educate young people so well that they actually were able to shoot an object into the atmosphere. Plus, they were the baby boomer generation that just hit school age. So there was a big need of turning out better educated young citizens and better education for a lot more citizens. And one solution to this problem was presented by Mr. Skinner, and he invented this machine that you see there. And I'm not sure if I can explain exactly how it works, but it had two small windows in the top, and in one of those would appear the question and on a long roll of paper, and on another paper you could write the answer, put it back into the machine, and at the same moment the correct answer would appear. So the machine provided immediate feedback and constant positive reinforcement, and it also allowed students to learn at their own pace. And somehow this sounds to me a lot like what we talk about right now with often digital methods. And the device actually paved the way for various methods that are still used today in education technology. But one thing it did not and never replace teachers. You can say it is true that this machine and also some digital tools facilitate the work of teachers immensely, because, for example, once you record a lecture and you make it available to your students, the content can be conveniently accessed remotely at any time from where your students want to be, as often as they need it to listen to it. And if you take these thoughts a step further, you could come to the conclusion that digitization makes teachers redundant. At least if you see teachers as purely transferring knowledge from them to to students, to other people. And I believe this is wrong. I believe this underestimates the work of teachers, because teaching is about supporting students to use this knowledge, not just to transfer it to them, but then to use it to them and to apply it to their field of profession they chose. And it gives the impression that the possibilities of digitization would simplify teaching per se. And I believe that most of you can disagree to this, because I believe it's a misjudgment to think that digitization makes teaching easier or quicker. And even before the pandemic, it was scientifically well documented that teachers who use new digital formats initially require more effort to prepare their seminars or lectures. What you could say is that if lectures use the range of digital possibilities, this could be accompanied by a shift in their own role. So digital tools could enable a shift in the direction of, let's say, learning process advisors or learning coaches, because once you use digital formats, you must follow and, if necessary, comment on participant contributions, also outside of attendance times. And you need to communicate with participants via different channels. You need to stimulate and moderate exchange, also between participants online. So there's a lot more than just simplifying teaching. And so digitization will not make teachers redundant, not in the sense that I understand teachers. And this is a myth that is talked a lot about, and I think it's really important when we plan teaching or when we plan whatever is happening in a digital manner at university. Because it's often talked about that digital natives have soaked up digital skills with their mother's milk. And like, maybe let's look at what a digital native is. Like, depending on where you look, it describes people up to the birth year of 1980. But I actually believe the term refers primarily to a perceived or real break in media usage behavior between generations in terms of age. And the myth would be served by concluding that young people know everything they need to know about the technologies that surround them, and therefore have digital competencies, which teachers then can count on. And while it is true that there's a somewhat higher level of media use in the age cohort of 24 to 37 than among those over 37, I think it's dangerous to believe that the more use of digital media is synonymous with the ability to also use these media critically, reflexively, and productively in an academic context. Because this study, for example, shows that 20% of first-year students have no basic knowledge of ICT. And ICT stands for Information, Communication, and Technology. So how you evaluate them, how you communicate information purposefully and critically. And also 50% of students in the 6th year still do not reach the proficient competency level. And it shows how important the acquisition of digital skills is and how necessary, just as it is necessary to practice dealing with scientific literature. Just because I read books in my free time doesn't mean that I know how to use like library and books in a scientific way. And every first-year student gets this course. And so also digital literacy needs to be taught. And the picture is very similar actually for teachers, even though the pandemic created considerably pressure, so that many teachers who didn't have like previous experience have gained new experiences during the pandemic. Still, now I got further. Still, a third of students say that their teachers lack digital skills. So they need to be learned. And I believe it is really important that we establish or expand further training opportunities for students and teachers. So let's look at the current status a little. Where are we right now in Germany in regards to higher education? And what I'm saying now is based on a study from 2021, where all presidents and rectors were invited to participate. And in the end, a total of 126 universities participated. What does it show about the current status? The study gives us 5 claims about the current status. And the first one is that we are in a phase in which terms and concepts have to be renegotiated. What do I mean by it? I brought here a tweet by Tobias Ortelt. He's a mechanical engineer at the Technical University of Dortmund. And he answers to another person and says, for her, it is clear that the future is hybrid. I only agree with this statement if hybrid is not only understood as synchronous teaching, as is often the case in the current situation. For me, hybrid is the mix of presence and digital, on-site and elsewhere. And I believe this shows really well what the study also showed. We need to speak the same language. And the discussion about the future design of teaching or of universities in general is mainly conducted under the term hybrid teaching. But hybrid teaching is used as a collective form for different forms of combining face-to-face and online teaching. And the debate on terminology and future concepts at universities is not complete. It's in progress. And we just have to remind ourselves and maybe ask next time we talk about this and say, oh, you say you do this hybrid. What do you mean by it? Because I believe it's important that we realize we're in this process and we need to be clear about concepts in order to move further and understand each other. The second claim is that Corona has changed teaching, but not as much as we hoped and or feared. What do I mean by this? The study shows that 90% of respondents see changes in teaching formats. I believe this is no surprise. Because during this Corona semesters, we have seen pure online teaching for months and months. So everything changed rapidly. And almost no university wants to go back to pre-corona times with pure face-to-face teaching without digital elements. Only 1% of teachers in the study say that the changes we have seen will only last during the corona pandemic. 81% instead say the teaching that we have done in the past semesters is to be remained in one way or another. But when we look at what we actually did, especially technically easy solutions have been used, mostly online seminars and video conferences, teaching videos. So you can say that formats have been used that are close to analog lectures and that has been put into a digital environment. And also this is no surprise because teachers had to make their teaching happening from Friday to Monday into a complete different environment. It had to happen so quick and people did not have the time to think about how they could do this teaching. It just had to work from day one to day two. But what we therefore didn't really see during Corona was didactic diversity. And if we really want to change towards a university of the future, like a digital transformation, a lot still has to happen. And then you see that only 17% say that digitization needs to be driven forward. So the question now is to whether we want to build on what we did and tried in the last years, and also where we failed or where we realized this is not working, or it was working, but it was not good, didactically, for example. So yes, you can say that Corona has changed teaching, but not as in as many ways and not as diverse as we hoped for. However, from a positive side of view, all teachers have made experiences with digital teaching, and a lot of them did not have any previous experience. And I believe this collective momentum now could be used in order to further discuss sustainable higher education. On the one hand, you can see somewhat mood of departure or a spirit of optimism when you look at the 1% of heads of universities that say that digitization at the university is only meant to last during Corona. And on the other hand, it is clear that most universities in Germany understand themselves as presence universities. So it's really interesting where this is going to be, this process. Because 90% of respondents wish to combine face-to-face and online teaching in the future. So they understand themselves as presence universities, but they want to combine methods. And we should also not forget that half of them stated that they had already launched initiatives in this direction even before the pandemic. So again, there has been change, a lot of change during Corona, but we can't just pinpoint it on Corona. Many, many people say that the change already happened before. But maybe you can say that the consideration of digitization has finally arrived in the broad of the university and not just with specific individuals. And here you can see that the respondents say that the future proportion of pure face-to-face teaching is at around 60%, whereas it was at about 85% before the pandemic. And the future proportion of mixed formats lies at about 24%, where it was about, I think, 8% before the pandemic. So again, there is some change. What does the study show about exams? And this, I believe, is really interesting because in the media, the discussion was always about online proctoring, there would be no legal security, there are technical problems, etc., etc. But the study shows here that at universities, the discussion is not so much, of course, there have been and there are these discussions, but it's not just about proctoring, but it's rather about alternative testing scenarios. And online formats for written and oral examinations, for example, which were introduced mostly due to the pandemic, are also planned for the future at many universities concerning this study, but not in a proctored manner. Online oral exams, for example, are planned in 74% of the answers for the future. Written online exams at about 55%. but 60% say also clearly no to proctored written exams. So I believe there's a shift, not just in how we test, but we are talking much more about a culture of testing. It's more about competency-based. It's more about dialogue-oriented testing. And I believe this is a good direction. And the last claim of the study is that more participation in decision-making processes is happening again. So, because in the pandemic phase, we needed quick, pragmatic solutions that had to be found and were therefore often taken by the university management. And the study shows that those who have already been involved always continue to be in charge in the future, like vice presidents, presidents, chancellors. But the study also shows that in the future, it will again be determined by more stakeholders at university, how it's used to be. So in particular, professors, students, student representatives who have not been involved during the pandemic because decisions had to be taken so quickly. There is a last claim, which is about learning space design. Because I believe that if universities want to develop in the direction of blended learning, something I'm going to talk about now, this will have an impact on uni as a space. It will mean less lecture halls, more open spaces, co-working spaces, etc., etc. But during the corona, this had no impact because everyone was at home. And except for the equipping of classrooms with video systems, there was hardly any changes happening. But you can also see here that a lot of heads of universities actually said that these changes, or some of these changes, happened already before the pandemic. So again, there is maybe already a move towards this direction, like that we need more co-working spaces and creative spaces and so on. But the question remains, does a different form of teaching that I wish for the future requires new learning spaces? And how will the university adapt to the new needs of teachers and students with regards to learning spaces? And now we come to the part of the vision of the university of the future. And again, before I'm going to talk about my vision of the future, I would like you again to pick a friendly face, maybe another one than the one from the last round, and discuss with that person for 5 minutes this question: what's your vision of the university of the future? And again, if you're digitally here with us, we're going to put you in breakout rooms. I've just asked you this question because I believe it's immensely important that we all have our own vision of the future. And even more, as part of an institution like university, I believe it's super important to have a common understanding, because we need a common understanding in order to go into the same direction as a university. So as soon as you have a common direction, a common vision, you can slowly but surely make steps in this direction. You can take small steps, but you know where you want to get to in the end. So I believe it's really important for this process to talk about it. So what's actually my vision of the university of the future? I am certain, and I believe that you realized after the last 40 minutes that I talked, that the future of teaching at universities will lie neither in pure presence, which can do without digital media, nor in pure online teaching. I believe in a blended university, which is characterized by a balanced mix of classroom face-to-face teaching and digital elements. The task now is to wisely combine the best of both worlds. And the goal should be, of course, high quality teaching that focuses on learners and learning objectives. And the focus should be on the question of how students can best be prepared for a working world of tomorrow. And this working world will, or for this working world, digitization and teamwork and projects play a big role. So I believe by combining online and face-to-face teaching, you can profit from the advantages of both teaching modes, and the disadvantages can be avoided. So if you think this further, because we talk about not blended learning, but blended university, it means the combination of digital and presence elements in all aspects of university. So it's about teaching and studying, it's about examinations, it's about administration and governance structures, it's about research, third mission, etc. And the university as a whole, together with all its institutions, would be thought as not purely presence, but as a good combination of digital and present elements. And this would come with a cultural change in regard to service structures, interior design, the understanding of the own roles of teachers and learners as well, and the day-to-day interaction of all status groups. So, but since we at the HFD, we focus on teaching and learning, I believe the main question here should be about, or it shouldn't be about how much digital teaching is fine, but it should focus on the needs of the stakeholders. And in teaching, for example, we should ask ourselves what digital and on-campus methods help students to prepare for real life in a really digitally shaped working world, where future competencies such as, I show them here to you, creativity, critical thinking, collaboration, and communication will have an outstanding significance. And how can we teach with digital and on-campus activities these skills to our students? And I believe it's about a new culture of teaching that is supported by digital elements. And I believe it's about activating teaching and learning methods where teachers are learning coaches rather than lecturers. I believe it's about a mix of synchronous and asynchronous learning phases. I believe it's about independent and self-directed learning and project and works. I believe interdisciplinary and international experience is important. And these are just a few examples that should characterize the teaching of the future, because it is what our students will need for their working life. And I believe it's going to be a lot more about knowledge transfer online and then activity on site. And a good example here, I call it, I believe, new teaching concepts, but we all know inverted classroom is not a new teaching concept. It's been around for quite a while, but I believe right now it's being more and more talked about. But I believe it's a good example because students can study at their own pace in an environment that they choose, where they meet other students and teachers for an intensive exchange at uni during presence phases. And again, don't see the use of digital media as a purpose in itself, because it is not. It's an extended tool that you can use where it adds value in achieving your didactic goals. So how can we create an optimum in which teaching is not carried out online or in presence per se, but in which digital elements are used when content is conveyed most efficiently, and then consciously focuses on presence teaching when the lively exchange between students and lectures can advance teaching? And again, ask yourself, what can face-to-face teaching do that online teaching cannot? And these are the elements that we're going to do on campus together. And I believe this should be the common starting point for comprehensive discussion and negotiation of online and face-to-face learning. It's a process of further development of teaching that is student-centered and does not put rigid online or face-to-face possessions against each other. I don't think it's going to bring us anywhere. I believe the university of the future will have less lectures and pure knowledge transfer in lecture halls. In the Corona crisis, we talked a lot about the quality of digital teaching, digital methods, but also I think it made us think about the methods we used before the Corona crisis, actually. And I do believe that a lecture hall with 600 students and one teacher that stands in front of them and talks for 90 minutes is something that I could not also do from my couch on, maybe, vielleicht. But what do I want instead? I want on campus more exchange, more discussion, and more doing. And I believe it's a question about how universities of the future want to position themselves. Because especially now during the Corona pandemic, the question of whether universities want to be places of social exchange and personal development is even more important than before, because all of a sudden we realize is when we don't have it anymore, how important this is. And this new approach to teaching and learning that I'm aiming for also has implications for the design of learning spaces and the further development of campus structures. And the campus of the blended university is, for me, for my colleagues, a place of encounter. It's a place that invites people to exchange ideas, to be creative, and to enjoy spending time there. And with learning and working spaces that can be adapted to the needs of students and teachers and not the other way around, I believe this can be supported. I said it before, I believe the digital transformation or the use of digital tools can come with a shift in roles of teachers, but also of students. And I believe it could go into a direction where teachers are more learning facilitators or learning coaches that support the students on their learning journey. What else do I think will the future look like? I believe we will have less of the classic exam scenario that we're used to. I brought you a photo here, and the headline says 14,000 students write exams in the big Westfalenhalle. It's a huge stadium where the Red Hot Chili Peppers play in Dortmund. And especially with regard to exams, I believe a rethink must take place. And I think here and there it happens already, as I mentioned before. These classic scenarios, such as written exams, even multiple choice exams, I believe should be a thing of the past. And instead, we should focus on exams that are competency-based. And I believe universities also have experimented already with some digital scenarios in this direction during the pandemic, and it's talked about a lot. This could include, for example, open book exam scenarios, digital open book, take-home exams, which can be supported by digital media, but do not have to be proctored or monitored. There are also options like semester accompanying tests or reflection tasks, such as e-portfolios, that support students in their learning process far better than the classic mass examinations once a semester. And I, for example, had during my bachelor, my 4-year bachelor, I had to uphold a portfolio for 4 years that was just always there and was a lot about my reflective skills as a professional. And the biggest exam I had was not the defense of my bachelor thesis, it was the defense of my portfolio, and where it came all down to the core competencies I have, and not about pure knowledge that I would learn in a book. It was about myself as a professional. And I believe this portfolio, by now, after 6 years of studying, had for me the biggest learning curve of all exams I ever did. I also believe that it's going to be more about project work in groups, or also classic academic seminar papers or oral examinations. So all formats that enable students to prepare for the working world because it's in a realistic setting. And I also believe that we need to talk more about joint projects, new forms of learning, project work, project-based learning in teams, because the blended university, as we're imagining it, empowers students to acquire a lifetime of new and ever-changing knowledge. And it not only prepares students for the job market, but it also promotes their personal skills and enables them to participate successfully and responsibly in the society. So I'm coming to the end of my talk. And what I invite you to do is to take a step back and take your time to reflect on those crazy 2 years that lie behind us, and then to think with an open mind actually about your own teaching, about your own role at university, and if digitization could improve it here or there. And again, do not think in terms of digitizing all aspects of it, because nobody wants this, but find those fragments that would benefit of it. And the last thing I would like you to say is, even though I told you that it's really important to have a clear vision of yourself and to have a clear vision of an organization in order to go into the same direction, and I really invite you to make this a topic at your working space, I believe it's not always about knowing everything and being certain and about having the perfect 5-year plan from now on. Because we're in a process of change, but the world is always changing. It's always a process of change, and we can't always control it. And I believe right now it's about taking time and taking attention to realize what's actually happening around us in this current situation. And I wish us all some serenity to trust the process, because as long as we have a vision where we want to go or what we want to try out, I think it's going to work out. So good luck with this. And thank you.